I'm going to go on a rant real quick. The 3 AP history courses have the exact same exam format with just different content, and none of the 3 AP tests actually test your knowledge on history. You can complete the DBQ without knowing anything about the course. 2 out of 3 of the SAQs have a stimulus attached to them, making it so you're mostly just referencing the argument of the people within the stimulus rather than talking about history. And the stimulus-based multiple choice questions are the biggest, most difficult joke to ever grace an exam, that even if you knew the content, you're not going to do well. The only thing on the exam that might actually test your knowledge on history is that last SAQ and the LEQ. Let me give you an example. There was a girl in my AP Euro class last year named, well, let's just keep her name redacted. She knew everything on European history. Heck, even more than me. Exam day comes on May 5th, and she completely fails it. That girl knew way more than me on everything relating to European history, and still got a score that was a lot worse than mine on her AP European history exam. And this is because a lot of people don't realize you only need to know a tiny bit about history to actually pass your exam. What you truly need to know is the way to tackle the actual exam. We'll be going over this in this video and how to tackle all 4 sections of the exam that will get you a 5 when you take APUSH. So basically the correct way to do it. And the content of the entire course, of course, the content section will be short because, again, you don't actually need to know the content to pass the course. I promise you, if you memorize everything I say in this video and practice it, you will get a 5 on your APUSH exam. So, let's get into it. What are we thinking of this outside setting? Pretty cool? It's a pretty windy one outside. Power editing, you can barely notice. Like the breeze of the water though? I do. First, we'll cover content on a unit-by-unit basis. Unit 1 is barely worth any weight on your exam, and I therefore don't care much for it, and neither should you. All you need to know is that before 1492, when Columbus landed in the New World, there were active civilizations in the Americas, like the Mississippian culture, the Pueblo River Valley, along with the Mayans and the Aztecs. Now, most all of these civilizations supported themselves with hunting and gathering, with a particular interest in maize cultivation. After Europeans were trying to find a different route to get involved in the Indian Ocean trade that wasn't around the tip of Africa like one certain Bartholomew Diaz, they, meaning of course Christopher Columbus, discovered the Americas. The reason they colonized the Americas was because of really 3 reasons. Those are the 3 G's: gold, God, and glory. So basically they wanted mineral resources, they wanted to convert the natives to their religion, and they wanted to get more land to be the most powerful European empire. As more Europeans came into contact with the Americas, the Columbian Exchange ensued, which saw the exchange of flora, fauna, food, animals, diseases, and slaves between the Old World and the New World. And of course, the Europeans enslaved the natives, as well as the only system of slavery you really need to know for your exam, which is the encomienda system, which wasn't really a system of slavery, it was more just a system of land grants, but it had heavy slavery involved with it. This led to the Europeans implementing a caste system known as the caste system, where the Europeans were at the top with the African and Indian slaves at the bottom. And that's all you need to know for Unit 1. Now we just have 8 more to go. There's a guy fishing over there. That's cool. Unit 2 is weighted a little more than Unit 1, but still not a lot, so again, don't worry about it too much. After the Europeans came in contact with the Americas, the societies of the Americas changed. Europeans conquered most all of the territories and therefore implemented the slavery of the natives. But because the natives knew the land a lot better, and a good 90% of them were dying from European diseases like smallpox, they needed another solution of a way to extract natural resources from the New World. This led Europeans to pay African leaders to send its citizens to be forcefully enslaved in the Americas by the Europeans. This solved the problems because Africans had a natural immunity to diseases like smallpox, and they knew the land a lot worse than the Europeans. This system of slavery, of course, being called chattel slavery. Most all slavery rebellions were put down, and as for English colonies, the Chesapeake Bay and North Carolina colonies grew prosperous, exporting tobacco, with the first colony being Jamestown. The New England colonies, initially settled by the Puritans, developed around small towns with family farms and achieved a thriving mixed economy of agriculture and commerce. The middle colonies supported a flourishing export economy based on cereal crops and attracted a broad range of European migrants to the colonies of the southern Atlantic coast, and the British West Indies used long growing seasons to develop plantation economies based on exporting stable crops. The implementation of these colonies would lead to them developing their own culture, with a prime example being the emergence of the transatlantic print culture and the spread of Protestant evangelicalism in British colonies. Another example of this could be the First Great Awakening, where, in response to the Enlightenment, colonist Christian leaders traveled from town to town to preach about the gospel, salvation, and enthusiasm for Christianity. Unit 3 time! This unit is the first unit to actually be worth something on your exam. It's a good chunk of it. So the first thing in this unit is about the 7 Years' War, or in North America called the French and Indian War. Essentially, Britain and France wanted to battle over colonial territories, particularly in the Ohio River Valley. And after the British won and settled it at the Treaty of Paris in 1763, they became broke. This caused them to tax the heck out of America through acts like the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, and intolerable acts. This combined with the ideals of the Enlightenment, like John Locke's ideal of one's personal right to life, liberty, and property, Rousseau's social contract, and Montesquieu's belief in the separation of powers, the colonists started a revolution. The only parts of this revolution that you should really know are 3 battles: Lexington and Concord, Saratoga, and Yorktown. Nice. Lexington and Concord because it was like the first one, Saratoga because it was the first battle that convinced France to join after won by the Americans, and Yorktown, which was the final battle of the Revolution, which America won. Also of note that Ben Franklin was the guy trying to convince France to join, and also the Revolution started with very small forces and became much larger. After America won and declared its independence in 1776, they implemented the Articles of Confederation. However, this left the government with basically no power, meaning that something else would need to be used to guide the Americans, and that would be the Constitution, which would be implemented at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. After this, the first 2 political parties would be formed, being the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, and the beginning of westward expansion. See, this is going really fast, aren't we? Since we're already on to Unit 4. As for Unit 4, the 19th century comes along and a lot of stuff happens. First, Marbury versus Madison, which of course establishes judicial review. The War of 1812 happened because really the U.S. kind of didn't like Britain. This was kind of justified though, because Britain was forcing American soldiers into their navy and also was blocking American trade with France. No one really won the war, and hopes were high in America because as they didn't win the war, they technically didn't lose it either. In McCulloch v. Maryland, it affirmed the doctrine of implied powers, meaning that Congress can take actions not explicitly stated in the Constitution if they are necessary and proper for the execution of its enumerated powers, which further upheld the idea of federalism. To prevent European involvement in colonies, Monroe passed the Monroe Doctrine, which said that if Europe intervened in America, it would be seen as an act of war. Now we start seeing the beginning of the Civil War causes. There was a balance of 11 slave states and 11 free states, but then Missouri got added, and no one knew whether it would be a slave or free state. Basically what happened is that it became a slave state, and then the North added Maine as a free state, and above a specific line there could be no more slave states. So that was called the Missouri Compromise. The North and South developed during this time, and the North being heavily industrialized caused by the Industrial Revolution in Europe, with the South remaining agrarian and rather focused on farming. This meant the South supported imports because they weren't making goods and needed them, and they wouldn't get them from the North. The North favored exports because they were making these goods and needed a market to sell them off. This resulted in the North kind of passing the Tariff of 1828, which the South called the Tariff of Abominations because it put a tax on imported goods. And of course, a tax on imported goods would help the North. So once the North saw this distress of the South, they passed the Tariff of 1832, which was supposed to appease the South. However, it backfired with the South Carolina Exposition and the start of the nullification crisis, where the South confronted the North about everything. A civil war most likely would have happened if it wasn't for Calhoun and Clay, who made a compromise tariff which would lower tariffs over the next 10 years, though civil war still would most likely happen in the future. Though the United States started with the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists, we see a shift now to the Democrats and the Whigs. When Jackson came into power as a Democrat, he was very radical. He disbanded the Second Bank of America and forced the Native Americans to move past the Appalachian Mountains in the Indian Removal Act, and in a devastating event known as the Trail of Tears, and a lot of other things. Economically, there was more consumerism because of more products, causing a sort of market revolution. Slaves were still treated poorly. Religiously, there was a Second Great Awakening that saw the revival of preaching and saw millions converted to Christianity. And of course, there was an influence of European Romanticism on America. The Seneca Falls Convention happened, where activists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the first women's rights convention and drafted the Declaration of Sentiments. Did I pronounce those names correctly? I know my women history. Alright, that was likely the biggest unit we have to cover, except for maybe Unit 7. Let's head on over to Unit 5 now. So I already mentioned the Trail of Tears. Well, that was kind of one of the headings of the idea of westward expansion. Of course, that land belonged to the natives, but there was this idea going around called Manifest Destiny, in which America believed they should conquer more land for God's sake. In this whole mess of westward expansion, the Mexican-American War happened, preceded by the whole Texas Revolution thing. The official cause of this war was a dispute over borders. The war ended with America winning and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. America would gain a lot of land from this treaty, which of course, with this whole slave state and non-slave state balance thing, it would need to be resolved. It would be resolved at the Compromise of 1850, but not well. They made California a free state and allowed New Mexico and Utah to freely vote for their slave or non-state pact. Another part of this compromise was the Fugitive Slave Act, which made it so the South could freely go into the North Territory to capture escaped slaves. And after some more tension, like the killings of a revolutionary named John Brown, along with the election of Lincoln into office, who was seen as an enemy of the South, South Carolina seceded from the Union and it started the Civil War. And listen, anyone could tell a war was about to happen. The nullification crisis, the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, all of these tensions just added wood onto little fire, and it was just too big to contain in the end. Battles of the Civil War, you should know, of course, are Gettysburg, Vicksburg, and Antietam. The South was kind of winning the war in the beginning, but really it was because of their brilliant generals like Robert E. Lee. Gettysburg and Vicksburg were two massive wins that happened around the same time, which allowed for the North to finally gain the upper hand. Antietam was the bloodiest battle in American history, so you gotta know that one. Once the North had ended up winning the war, 620,000 had died and lands were destroyed. In the war, Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation, which is a document freeing of the slaves, though it might not have worked at the time. And the Gettysburg Address was also passed, where Lincoln just got up on a stage and his awkward self just addressed the American public. So after the Civil War, the U.S. went through a Reconstruction era to try and reintegrate states back into the Union and figure out the whole legal status of blacks. Throughout this period, blacks were lynched in the South, and there was a massive economic depression in the South. This caused Reconstruction to fail around 1874. But hey, stuff still happened in Reconstruction that we can say we're proud of, like the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment, passed in Congress. Alright, it's Unit 6 time, let's just get into it. The late 19th century, known as the Gilded Age, was a period of rapid industrialization and economic growth, but also rampant inequality and corruption. The Second Industrial Revolution brought about massive corporations and monopolies, led by titans like Andrew Carnegie, who was steel, John D. Rockefeller, who was oil, and also J.P. Morgan, which was banking. While labor unions such as the AFL and Knights of Labor fought for better wages and working conditions, often met with violent repression in events like the Haymarket Riot and the Pullman Strike, politically this era saw a tug-of-war between Republicans advocating for high tariffs and Democrats pushing for free silver and lower tariffs. And this is all epitomized by William Jennings Bryan's Cross of Gold speech. Westward expansion continued, resulting in conflicts like the Battle of Little Big Horn and the massacre at Wounded Knee. While the Dawes Act aimed to assimilate Native Americans by dissolving tribal lands. So essentially, they're trying to expand across Native American lands. Rapid immigration from southern and eastern Europe swelled urban populations, leading to the rise of ethnic neighborhoods and poor tenement conditions, exposed by muckrakers like Jacob Riis. Social reformers like Jane Addams sought to alleviate poverty through sentiment houses, while Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois clashed over strategies for African American advancement. Despite economic downturns like the panics of 1873 and 1893, consumer culture blossomed, stores and mail order catalogs, and literature thrived with Mark Twain and Henry James capturing the spirit of the age. On a little darker note, Plessy v. Ferguson happened in 1896, upholding that Africans could be treated separately but equal to all Americans. So, not really equally. Alright, Unit 7, let's get into it. Looking at the CED for this, it is massive, so let's just get rolling. First, we start with Americans getting their feet dabbled in imperialism by blaming the sinking of the USS Maine on Spain, causing the Spanish-American War. This quick conflict led to the U.S. acquiring the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam and stirred up debates over imperialism, with the Anti-Imperialist League arguing against annexation and expansion. Following the war, the Progressive Era emerged as a reaction to the excess of industrialization, with reformers like Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Jane Addams advocating for social, political, and economic reforms. Progressives targeted issues like child labor, poor working conditions, and political corruption, while also pushing for women's suffrage and temperance. World War I saw the U.S. initially maintain neutrality until German unrestricted submarine warfare sunk the Lusitania, and the Zimmermann telegram prompted them to join the Allies. The military contribution of American troops helped tip the scales in favor of the Allies, and the Treaty of Versailles set harsh terms for Germany while also establishing the League of Nations, which the U.S. ultimately refused to join. On the home front, the war spurred massive economic and societal shifts, with women entering the workforce in greater numbers, and the Great Migration seeing African Americans move north for industrial jobs. However, wartime fears also led to the suppression of dissent via the Espionage and Sedition Acts, and a surge in xenophobia, culminating in the Red Scare and the Palmer Raids. The 1920s roared with innovations in communication and technology as the radio, movies, and automobiles transformed American life. The era's consumer culture was epitomized by flappers, jazz, and Harlem Renaissance artists like Langston Hughes, while cultural and political controversies emerged around Prohibition, the Scopes Monkey trial, and immigration restrictions like the National Origins Act. Also, women's rights, as the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. The prosperity of the 1920s came crashing down with the Great Depression, triggered by the stock market crash of 1929. Banks failed, unemployment soared, and millions were plunged into poverty. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal sought to address this crisis through relief, recovery, and reform programs like the Civilization Conservation Corps, Social Security, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Despite these efforts, critics emerged from both the left and the right, and the economy remained fragile. So as the U.S. navigated the interwar years, isolationism prevailed with policies like the Neutrality Acts. But the rise of fascism in Europe and Japanese expansionism in Asia made another global conflict inevitable. World War II shattered American isolationism after Pearl Harbor, leading to full-scale mobilization on the home front, with women and minorities filling industrial roles, while Japanese Americans were interned. The war in Europe and the Pacific saw iconic battles like D-Day and Midway, ultimately ending in the Allied victory and the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Post-war diplomacy was defined with the onset of the Cold War, as the U.S. and Soviet Union vied for global influence, but more on that next unit. What's going on, buddy? What do you need? You need something? I'm trying to record a video here. It may be windy out here today, but you got to get out of here. Alright, only 2 more units left. Let's get into Unit 8. This period covers the Cold War era, civil rights movements, and transformative social changes. We kick off with the Cold War, a tense standoff between the U.S. and the Soviet Union from 1945 to 1980, defined by a struggle between capitalism and communism. The Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan aimed to contain communism's threat in Europe, while NATO and the Warsaw Pact solidified the division. In Asia, the Korean War ended in a stalemate, but fears of communist infiltration at home, sparked by the Red Scare and McCarthyism, led to loyalty oaths and blacklists. The 1950s economy boomed post-World War II, with suburbanization, baby boomers, and a rise of consumer culture symbolized by Leviatons, television, and fast foods. Culturally, the 1950s were marked by conformity and suburban ideals, but beneath the surface shimmered discontent that erupted in the civil rights movement. Early steps in the movement included the desegregation of the military, the Brown v. Board of Education decision of not having children segregated in schools, and of course the Montgomery bus boycott, led by Martin Luther King Jr. America asserted itself as a global power during the Cold War, supporting anti-communist regimes worldwide, while the arms race and the space race saw nuclear stockpiling and the launch of Sputnik. In the 1960s, the Vietnam War became a more defining conflict, leading to widespread protests and a divided nation. The Great Society, Lyndon B. Johnson's ambitious domestic program, aimed to eliminate poverty and racial injustice with Medicare, Medicaid, and war on poverty. Meanwhile, the Civil Rights Movement gained momentum with landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, the movement splintered as groups like the Black Panthers and Malcolm X advocated for more militant approaches. The Civil Rights Movement expanded beyond African Americans, with second-wave feminism, the Chicano movement, and the American Indian movement, and LGBTQ+ rights movement, all fighting for equality. Youth culture in the 1960s saw a rise of counterculture and hippies, and this is of course symbolized by Woodstock and anti-war protests. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring sparked the modern environmental movement, leading to the establishment of Earth Day and the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. Society was in transition by the 1970s, as economic troubles like stagflation and oil crisis, along with scandals like Watergate, and that kind of eroded trust in the government. The 1970s also saw significant shifts in family structures, religious practices, and demographics, as the U.S. became more multicultural. Alrighty, last unit, let's do it. Unit 9 is also barely worth noting on the exam because it's only worth a little bit. We begin with the rise of conservatism in the 1980s under Ronald Reagan. Reagan's policies emphasized tax cuts, deregulation, and a strong military, contributing to an era known as Reaganomics. The Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, marking a shift to U.S. global dominance and new international challenges like the Gulf War. The economy transformed with the growth of tech sector and globalization, leading to a shift from manufacturing to service-based industries. Migration patterns also shifted, with increased immigrations from Latin America and Asia in the 1990s and 2000s, changing the nation's demographic landscape. The 21st century brought new challenges, including the September 11th attacks and the subsequent War on Terror, the Great Recession of 2008, and debates over climate change, healthcare, and social justice. And oh lordy lord, we are done. So, what do we got now? I'm just going to transfer this over right to Desk Max. So, good luck. Wait, sorry. So, good luck.
Cheers outside, Max. Thank you for passing the mic over to me. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you guys how you basically cheat the exam. Because like I said, you know the bare minimum amount of content. Now let's use that and let's answer the exam questions. We're going to cover all 4 parts of the exam. We have the stimulus-based multiple choice, the short answer, the LAQ, the DBQ, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do each single one of them. So let's start with the stimulus-based multiple choice questions. So we see the first one. We see that what you want to do with the stimulus-based multiple choice questions, and I don't have many tips for these because they're very difficult, but what you always want to do if you're given a stimulus is to read the source first. Now, if you know this content of this course well enough, then you should be able to answer the question just by reading the stimulus. So we know this is Harry Truman, and he's given a speech on what will be the Truman Doctrine. And we already know the Truman Doctrine because we know it was given right in the Cold War as an idea to contain communism. So let's look at the options. Actually, sorry, before we look at the options, we should read the stimulus. Now, I'm not going to read the stimulus on screen, but these all will be linked in the description of this video if you want to follow along with me. So go ahead and read the stimulus if you want to right now. And what it should say is that essentially they're trying to help the Europeans. They're trying to work out their destinies in their own way. So essentially it's just saying how democracy is good, communism is bad. Okay, so in this statement, Truman had the goal of, now let's look at each of the options. A, restraining communist military power and ideological influence. This is a good option. It's technically not wrong, and it's looks good to me. I mean, this is exactly what Truman is trying to do. Now, there could be a better answer, though, so let's go through each of them. Creating alliances with recently decolonized nations. Now, while the United States did create alliances with recently decolonized nations, during the Cold War, this was not the primary goal of the Truman Doctrine. The focus of the doctrine was more immediate, aimed at preserving the expansion of communism in Europe and just trying to stop the expansion of communism in Europe. So B is wrong. C, the reestablishing of the principle of isolationism. This shouldn't even be an option here. The Truman Doctrine shows the U.S. trying to move away from isolationism, not the other way around, so this is just completely wrong. And D, avoiding a military confrontation with the Soviet Union. So, yes, Truman did want to avoid a military confrontation with the Soviet Union, as the United States tried to throughout the Cold War. But this is not what the Truman Doctrine is about. It is about containing communism. So that means our best answer would have to be A. Alright, let's look at the next one. Truman issued the doctrine primarily in order to, alright, this should be fun, support decolonization in Asia and Africa. Remember, though decolonization was supported by the U.S., this wasn't the goal of the Truman Doctrine, so it can't be A. B. Support United States allies in Latin America. Again, what does Latin America have anything to do with this Truman Doctrine right now? Now C. Protect United States interests in the Middle East. Okay, you can make an argument for C, because C is technically correct. But the better answer here would be D, because D says bolster non-communist nations, particularly in Europe. And this is more correct than C, because this D is what the Truman Doctrine is really setting out to do. C is technically correct, but not more correct, if you get where I'm coming from. Alright, next one. First, we read the first one. We read the source. Thomas Jefferson, Declaration of Independence. Just from this, you should already know. This is coming from Unit 3, and it's all about United States declaring independence from Britain. So, if you read the excerpt, you see that's exactly what it is. The right of the people to alter and abolish it. We know what the Declaration of Independence is. The excerpt was written in response to British government's attempt to assert greater control over Northern American colonies. Okay, that is exactly what the Declaration of Independence was written to do. It was to try and go against Britain. So this is technically correct. Let's see if there's a better answer. B. British government's failure to protect colonists from attacks by American Indians. This is not correct. I guess you can make an argument for it might have been a concern, but the Declaration was not for that reason, so it's not B. C. Colonial government's failures to implement mercantilist policies. Well, they didn't fail to implement mercantilist policies. That's the issue. The colonists objected to British imposed restrictions on trade, so this is just wrong. D. Colonial government's attempt to extend political rights to new groups. Now, the colonists were not trying to attempt to extend political rights to new groups at this time. Instead, the Declaration addressed grievances about the British authority. So your correct answer would be A. Alright, 4. The ideas about government expressed in this excerpt are most consistent with which of the following? Okay, this will be fun. The concept of hereditary rights and privileges, no. So this would be based on like if you were in Europe and you had king and queen. So this is just completely wrong. We're going on the ideas of democracy, not monarchy. So this is just wrong. The belief in manifest destiny. If you remember, manifest destiny is that belief that that the Americans should conquer the West because of the idea of doing it for Jesus, doing it for God. So I am not sure. This doesn't have any influence on the Declaration of Independence. This doesn't align with it at all. So get that out of there. Now C, the principle of religious freedom. Now, this is technically true because the American government was advocating for religious freedom. I mean, heck, the First Amendment is your freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion. So yes, this is one of them. But the better answer here is the ideals of the Enlightenment. And the reason for that is because the religious freedom is just one single part of it. The Enlightenment was one of the reasons of this revolution, and the whole thought behind the Declaration of Independence was the thought of the Enlightenment, so it has to be D. Okay, next. This time we're given a graph instead of an excerpt, so I appreciate that. So this is talking about the migration to the United States between 1820 and 1860. And we see that the migration peaks around 1845 and goes up till 1855. So let's see the first question here. Trend shown in the graph was most likely associated with which of the following processes occurring in the United States at the time? Okay, this should be fun. Let's do it. Answer A, the convergence of European and American cultures. Now, although European immigrants did contribute to American culture, the primary driver was economic opportunity rather than cultural convergence. So I wouldn't say it's A. All right, B, the emergence of an industrialized economy. Now, this does make sense because the industrialized economy allowed for economic opportunity, and that was the main reason behind migration at this point. So, yes, it could be B. All right, C, the displacement of American Indians from the Southeast. Um, while American Indians were being displaced during this period, this trend did not directly influence migration, so I can't really say this one's right either. And D, the resurgence of evangelical Protestantism. This is during the Second Great Awakening, if you remember, and it did influence social movements, but it was not directly responsible for migration, so you can't really say it's D either. So that means B is the only answer that actually makes sense in this. So it's B. Next is 6. Which of the following was a significant cause of the trend of 1843 to 1854 shown in the graph? So from 1843, it starts spiking, and 1854, it reaches its peak. So it's just asking what happens, what made the migration happen. So A, active encouragement of migration by the United States government. A is one of those that they're trying to trick you with because you really want to think that the U.S. government is encouraging migration, but it really isn't. It's the migration of the mid 19th century wasn't really because of Europe. Because of United States government wanting to encourage it. It was because of events in Europe, like the Irish potato famine and the revolutions of 1848 in Europe. That's what pushed all the migrants over to Europe. So, really, A is incorrect. All right, B. Economic and political difficulties in Germany and Ireland. So what did I just say? Irish potato famine and the revolutions of 1848, and one of the revolutions was in Germany. So this is correct already, but let's go through the next two to see if there's something more correct. C. Incentives offered by United States companies looking to hire skilled migrants. Now, although American companies benefited from the influx of immigrants, the trend was not really. Again, the United States wasn't the ones that were offering the incentives for them to come over. It was more caused by the Europeans, stuff that was happening in Europe. So I can't really say that C is better than B in this. And finally, D, the adoption of free trade policies by European governments. Now, European governments just did not adopt free trade policies at all that would have caused this migration. It was because of the difficulties in Germany and Ireland, so it's just not D at all, so the answer is B. You can kind of see how these stimulus-based multiple choice goes. I eliminate all the options, and really it can only be one. So just do that on the exam, and remember you have 55 multiple choice questions in 55 minutes, meaning that you need to complete each question in 1 minute. So just time yourself. Remember, the AP exam should not be the first time you see this, okay? Next is the SAQs. Next, we move on to the SAQs. Now, these I think are a little bit easier, but they could be harder. You're just trying to express your knowledge on history. So we didn't do the stimulus-based ones because that, again, is just evaluating stimuli, sorry. And really, that is just something that you need to learn by practicing. So please search up stimulus-based SAQs and practice them. I beg of you, because we're not doing it in this video. This is off the third SAQ questions, and these were taken from actual exams, just like the stimulus-based multiple choice that we did earlier. So let's look at each of these. So first we have one. I'm going to tell you how exactly I'd answer each of these questions. I'm not going to do it, though, because that's going to take forever. So let's just go with each of them. Okay, first one. Briefly describe one way that agriculture influenced migration to North America from 1607 to 1776. Okay, so this is before America was a country, so it's asking us units 1 and 2. And if you remember, one of the big things I said was maize cultivation. You could use that. Another easy one that you could do is cash crops like tobacco. That's probably the one I'd go for here because that was one of the big reasons that Europeans kept coming over after the New World was discovered because of crops like tobacco, especially in South America. So yeah, that's pretty easy. So next is B. Briefly explain one similarity in how agriculture influenced the development of two regions in North America from 1607 to 1776. Well, if you remember, how we described this before in units 1 and 2 when I was doing the content earlier. I said the family farms and the middle colonies as one of the big things of when the British settled. So we'll use that. And if we're talking about family farms, that's really just similar to the plantation system the South had going. So I would say plantation system in the South and family farms in the Middle East. Man, this is easy. Okay, briefly explain one difference in how agriculture influenced the development of two regions in North America. Okay, well, again, easy one to go to here is very simple. The South's reliance on slaves for agriculture. You can always use that, and it works pretty well. So we'll say that as one. And again, we could just what's the opposite of slavery? I don't know. We could just say the New England's mixed economy. That's easy. Just one difference. Okay, next. This is the next question. Briefly describe one way that agricultural interests influenced societal debates in the United States from 1865 to 1900. So, this is a little less on what we learned. You're going to have to know your content a tiny bit more. I would say, as my answer, the populist movement and free silver debate. And I think I actually did say that in my content earlier, so... one for one. Let's go. B. Briefly explain one similarity in how agriculture influenced the development of two regions in the U.S. from 1865 to 1900. So, I guess if we're talking about agriculture, 1865 to 1900, we can basically say that it expanded the same in the West and the South. So that's how I would describe it. I would say the West changed the same way as the South, something like that. That'd be pretty easy. Now, C. Briefly explain one difference in how agriculture influenced the development of two regions in the United States. Okay, so it's just the opposite of C. So I would say, okay, so just as the West and South, that you could say that they're similar, I would say that, so adding on to B, they're similar by commercial farming, but the South and West are different. And this one by saying the Western kind of mechanized and the South started sharecropping. So there, that's pretty easy. Now, 3. Briefly explain one specific historical continuity and relations between American Indians and the United States in the period 1776 to 1815. Okay, well, both of them had conflicts over land. That's pretty easy. B. Briefly describe one specific historical change in relations between American Indians and the United States in the period. Okay, so it's just the opposite of A. Well, you could obviously talk about the treaty system being replaced by direct negotiation. And C. Briefly explain how one historical development in the period from 1815 to 1848 arose from earlier challenges in relations between American Indians and the United States. Well, this is easy. You could easily talk about Jackson's Indian Removal Act and the subsequent Trail of Tears. So, yeah, again, pretty easy. All you need to do is touch on the subject. You don't need to talk so much about it that you drown the AP reader's ears out. Just get to the point fast, describe it, and you're all good for SAQs. All right, next, LEQs. LEQs are a little bit different. Now, for essays like the DBQ and LEQ, you want to follow the 5-paragraph format, which means that your first and final paragraph need to be intro conclusion, and the 3-body paragraphs should be content-based. So, for the DBQ, you should be making 3 paragraphs, and for the LEQ, you should be making 3 paragraphs. So, instantly, when you see a prompt, you want to figure out what your 3 paragraphs are going to be about. So, first one. I'm not going to do all of these, but we'll do a few of them. You can do the rest if you'd like. They're on screen right now, of course. First one. Evaluate the extent to which transatlantic voyages in the period from 1491 to 1607 affected the Americans. Okay, well, the first paragraph, I would talk about the demographic impact that it had on the Native American populations. So, like the decline of Native populations due to diseases like smallpox and influenza, and of course the displacement due to Europeans' conquests. That's pretty easy. The body paragraph 2, I would talk about the economic impact and talk about the Columbian Exchange and the introduction of new crops and livestock. In paragraph 3, I would also talk about the cultural exchange, and religious changes, so like the spread of Christianity through missionary activity, like the Jesuits, and especially by the Spanish, and the introduction of European languages and stuff like that. So, you just got to know your Columbian Exchange for this first one. Okay, number 2. Evaluate the relative importance of causes of reform activity in the United States in the period from 1800 to 1848. Okay, so my first paragraph, I would talk about religious and moral reform movements. So like the Second Great Awakening leading to temperance and the women's rights movement, and the growth of moral reform societies focused on education and prison reforms. My second paragraph, I would probably talk about political causes, so like the democratization and the Jackson policies, like the expansions of voting rights to most white men and the rise of the common man in politics. And body paragraph 3 is talking about the market revolution and industrialization, because the rise of industrial capitalism led to labor reforms and the push for improved working conditions, of course. So this one is definitely a lot harder. You definitely need to know your pre-Civil War American history. So I would probably not go for this one, though I could do it. And we'll do this last one. So evaluate the extent to which international conflicts in the period from 1898 to 1930 affected the role of the United States in the world. Here's what I would do. I would do the Spanish-American War for one paragraph, and I would just explain like the expansion of American imperialism through annexation of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. And then for the next, I would do, since it falls in the time period World War I, and explain how the U.S. was affected with all of the espionage stuff and stuff like that, collective security. And then the final paragraph, I'd probably explain the Roaring Twenties and how the Dawes Plan and the Kellogg-Brand Pact, the Europeans trying to get involved in Europe, the Americans trying to get involved in Europe, stuff like that. So, yeah, just pick your 3 paragraphs, then go with it, and then write your essay. It's only worth 15% of your exam, so you don't got to worry about it. And it's time for the big one, the DBQ. So, in the interest of not making this video forever, we're not going to analyze an entire DBQ together, but we kind of are. So, I ain't going to write an entire essay, but we're kind of doing this. So, first things first, DBQ, it's the top link in the description. You got to follow along with me, and you got to do your own things if you really want to get something out of this video. So DBQ, this DBQ I chose on my least favorite unit just for you guys, so I could personally show you how I would deal if this is my choice, because it's my least favorite unit, probably the one I know the least about. But evaluate the effects of industrialization on U.S. society in the years 1865 to 1900. So instantly you should be thinking that we have Carnegie, we have Rockefeller, we have J.P. Morgan. That's going to be what this is all going to be about. It's going to be about the poor working conditions of the industrialization era. It's going to be about the influx of wealth. So then you want to read all your documents. Now, we're not going to do this together, but let me tell you the strategies that you need to do on the DBQ to be able to do it. Okay. So the DBQ, I've read this rubric in and out, and I get perfect scores on my DBQ all the time. So let me tell you how you need to do this. So as you read through the document, you need to write a tiny bit about what the document is right next to the document. Now, I didn't do it here, but like for example, this first document, it shows the historical statistics and the food prices, fuel prices, and the cost of living. And the big thing about this graph is we see the costs all go down. Now, this is, of course, because of the rise of consumerism, and therefore, if the demand goes up, the price is going to go down, and we see that happen. So I would write, like, for example, what I wrote here is because of the influx of goods, the prices for basic life necessities went down. So that's what I'd write next to this. And then I just do that for every single document. So like for this one right here about Andrew Carnegie, if you read it, then you realize that Carnegie is really just kind of bragging the entire time. So then what I said for it was Carnegie sees himself as a kind of Jesus figure as he lords above everyone with his immense wealth. And then like for example, this document, you read it and you realize that it's a guy from a trade union that's advocating and trying to get better wages. So what I say is that the trade union is asking for working rights, and the biggest complaint of the union in that specific excerpt is on hours. So Then, once you go through all of the documents, you look at your definitions that you just wrote. So, like all of these on each of the documents. And by the way, if you want to look over this and see how good your definition was to review, these are the ones I wrote down for each of the documents. See if they look something similar to mine. So, then you look over all your definitions and you see you kind of need to organize it into 3 groups. So, looking at all these, so we have because of the influx of goods, the prices for basic life necessities went down. Doc 2, the personality and the humanity of people working in factories have been destroyed because factory owners want them to be lifeless and only focus on their job. Okay, so we see some dehumanization. Industries have become so powerful that they have their sway on congressmen and potential legislation. Okay, so from what I'm seeing right now, we have they have monopolies over things. They have been dehumanizing people, and the industries have a sway over businessmen and are becoming so powerful. And then Carnegie sees himself as a Jesus figure. Again, that goes into powerful territory. Rebel against poverty and ask for change. Classes are evil. You could call that potentially dehumanizing. Trade union asking for working rights. Biggest complaint is on hours. So again, dehumanizing. And people are unable to start businesses like oil because of the monopoly. So monopoly. Okay. So then I organize it into 3 groups. The groups I have here are people's basic rights. And the biggest thing about the rights is that they are violating the rights. So then I organize the docs that I want to put in that paragraph. And you should try 3 per paragraph, if not 2 per paragraph. You need 3 in one paragraph. You need 2 in the other 2 paragraphs. So just bust out that 3 in one paragraph, then the 2. So, and then the paragraphs that have 2, you use some outside information to make sure you get that point on the DBQ. And so here, what I see is that the ones that are violating people's basic rights are the ones that read that is document 2, document 5, and document 6. So I organize it there. Next group, I have factory owners become drunk with power. So again, Carnegie talking about himself being a Jesus figure. That's doc 4. That's falls into that group. And document 3 about the industries becoming so powerful they have their sway over congressmen and potential legislation. That would also become them being drunk with powers. And you use outside information. And you do this to get the extra DBQ point because this is a point in the rubric. So the outside information I used was the Standard Oil monopoly using the Standard Oil Trust in 1882. And of course, this is extra information. I didn't mention the content because DBQs, you need to know your content if you want to get this extra point. And you don't have to get this extra point. You can get a 6 out of 7 on the DBQ, and that is way better than most everybody is going to do. So you don't have to go for this outside point. But I do. So if you know this, put it on there. You're all good. You only need to get it once, but you have 2 attempts because you have the outside point here that you can go for. So this is the one I would use. And then the last one is no chance to get out of poverty, meaning that they have these industries have a monopoly over the business. So these people in poverty don't have a chance to get out because they can't start their own businesses. And that's really exemplified in document 7, where that guy is just complaining about how Rockefeller ruined his life. And document 1, where it was that graph that you remember you saw earlier. The graph is really talking about how the prices have gone down, meaning that these people can't sell goods to get out of poverty. So again, that's another one that could support this. So, and the outside ones that I could use, and this is actually stuff I mentioned in the content part earlier, so you could still get the outside point just knowing what you remember from the content I said earlier. Poor tenement living conditions causing many not to be able to get anything done. So again, you can spin this any way you want. Get the 7 out of 7 points. And for 2 of the documents that you use, you always want to source them. And for sourcing, here's my tip for you. Explain who is saying it, number 1, and why are they saying it. That's how easy it is. Just do those 2 things and you'll get the sourcing point. Source 4 of your documents, you get the complexity point. But just by using all 7 of your documents, you automatically got that complexity point, so you don't even need to worry. Alright, I hope this helped you. Good luck on your exam. And remember, if you want access to any of these stimulus-based multiple choice, SAQs, LEQs, DBQ, it is in the links in the description. And yeah, review the content section of this video. If you memorize everything, you'll get a 5 on that exam, I promise. But yeah, good luck. I'll see ya. Bye-bye. Have a nice life. Have a good exam on Friday this week. Yes.